I'm Tammy Dunnett, ex-Target workplace bully turned communication coach. But it wasn't that long ago when I lacked the skills, the tools, and the knowledge to ditch the drama, confidently handle difficult conversations, and create better relationships. Fast forward past many failed attempts and lessons learned, and you will see the business that I have today. One that is helping others just like you to find the confidence and peace knowing you can change your circumstances one conversation at a time. I created the Dissolve Workplace Conflict Summit to give you access to industry leaders who are sharing simple, actionable, step-by-step strategies so you can do the same. If you are an employee, supervisor, or an employer and you are looking to access the top strategies to successfully dissolve conflict without damaging your relationships, then you, my friend, are in the right place. Today, I'd like to introduce you to Kathleen Bartholomew. She is a registered nurse and a healthcare culture expert and author of several books, Ending Nurse-to-Nurse Hostility, Speak Your Truth, and co-author of The Dauntless Nurse and Charting the Course. She is an international presenter of 20 years speaking to every level in an organization, including board retreats and non-nursing industries on topics of leadership, teamwork, and communication. And today we're going to be diving into the topic of what was that you didn't say? How to respond to nonverbal gestures. Welcome, Kathleen.
Thank you. Thanks for being here. I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, I'm excited to have this conversation too, because we know that nonverbal communication is a big part of our conversations in the workplace that can become misunderstood and problems for relationships. So let's start with just understanding how you became an expert in peer relationships.
It was an accident, of course. I was a manager and of a new floor, and one day I came in and there was a crash cart next to a patient's room. And when I went in and checked out the situation, I took the pain machine, brought it back to my office, and realized that the nurse had put the wrong drug in the machine, and the patient had almost died. So just then, the nurse came into my office and mumbled something under her breath. And of course, she was very upset, and it took a while to calm her down. But finally, I said, "What was that you mumbled under your breath?" And she said, "I shouldn't have let them get to me." And I said, "What are you talking about?" And she said, "I was coming around the nurses' station, and a group of nurses were there. And as soon as everybody saw me, everybody stopped talking. And so I went into the ladies' room, and you can hear from there, you know. And someone said, 'She'll never make a good nurse, will she?' And another voice responded, 'She just doesn't have what it takes.' And it was at that moment that I realized, I mean, my ethical obligation was to keep the patients safe, that the patients would never be safe unless the nurses were safe. And that safety was psychological and emotional safety.
Wow, that gives me goosebumps from head to toe. Obviously, my nursing or my background is nursing as well, and I've certainly seen close calls and have seen conversations like this as well. And to know that that nurse felt like she allowed somebody else to influence her practice, that just gives me goosebumps.
Yeah, and it's because she's a human being. So
Mhm.
I think that it's important to understand that this is really not about nice stuff. This is about how our brain is hardwired. So when we're upset, our brain rewires from the frontal cortex back to the amygdala. I mean, when we're in danger, the animal, the social animal that is us, you know, everybody does this. There's nobody who can think straight when they're upset. It's just not possible.
Mhm. So you had mentioned that it's hard for people to think straight, and you'd mentioned the amygdala. What is it specifically about that pathway, or us not connecting or disconnecting that makes it so hard?
Disconnecting?
Um,
Oh, we disconnect from the frontal cortex where all of the information is. So the information that the nurse had, for example, in the last situation that I told you to keep the patient safe, she knew that the protocol was two nurses checking. She knew she was changing drugs, but we don't know, we don't recall all of that in a situation of distress. Here's an example. Here's another example. You may have remembered when Sully landed on the Hudson in
mhm.
the winter on the water. So do you think that anybody in that plane didn't know where their life vest was? But you know, no matter how many times I go over that photo, there's like, I don't know, 7 or 8 little pieces of yellow that you see, and that's it. Because when people are in danger, they don't recall the information that they were taught or that they learned or what best practice is or what the evidence is. They immediately go to their amygdala where it's just fight or flight because
Mhm.
they're afraid. They've been hurt. They're in danger.
Wow. And so part of what she was experiencing was the impact of nonverbal behaviors. I mean, there were words spoken, but there's a lot more to what people say than meets the eye. So, what would be some examples of nonverbal behaviors?
Well, sarcasm, eye rolling is one of the most popular. Raised eyebrows, sighing, completely ignoring, not paying any attention to anybody. And I have to add, just a gut feeling. I mean, I know as a mother, when I come in and my kids have done something wrong, I'll say, okay, what happened? And they'll go, what do you mean? Like, how could she possibly tell? And it's the pheromones that we pick up. So if you think somebody doesn't like you and you don't check it out, they probably don't. I
Mm.
mean, we just don't check it out. I mean, they may have a grudge for some reason. So it's these nonverbals that really drag us down because they're hurtful and we don't check them out and we're not taught how to respond to them.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. I would imagine there's quite an impact when we don't actually check it out. So, aside from people not clearly thinking in those moments, what would be some of the other impacts if we don't actually do that due diligence to find out if our perception is in fact accurate?
Well, then you're going to run on the reason that you think. Maybe they don't like you. Maybe they think you're not doing a good job. And this is going to impact your work performance, the team's work performance. You're going to perseverate about it, meaning, all the research shows that you think about it again and again and again, even after the event. And the next time you see that person, you'll even remember it again. So
Mhm.
it takes up a lot of our thought capacity.
So, in this story of this nurse that you had shared, because obviously there's a lot of internal judgment and perceptions about what's happening and what they're saying and what it means, like what are the bigger implications to that? Do you feel that, like, was this just a one and done, or was this something that had been going on for a while that she was dealing with and just didn't know how to address it?
I didn't get a chance to ask her because she left my floor so quickly that she was gone in the next position that
Oh.
in the hospital. But I'll tell you what I did do. I sat and at change of shift and I started listening and watching for the nonverbal and verbal behaviors. And boy, did I see them. I mean, I just it was part of the culture. And coming into the profession late, not till I was 39 years old, I didn't see these things before. I thought it was just like, you like some people and you don't like others. Yeah, you get along with some people and not others, but it's far different than that. It's much more serious. So we had communication workshops and learned how to call out those nonverbal behaviors and check out anything that we saw that was upsetting us. And everybody understood that they really had to be safe. They had to know that every member of their team had their back.
Mhm. What was it that surprised you the most about these behaviors, whether they're covert, open, or covert or overt? Is that the other word? For some reason, it's
Yes, yes.
escaping my mind right now.
I think what surprised me the most is that people think that they're normal. And I'm shocked at how harmful they are. They're very hurtful. And people don't admit that. They're like, oh, yeah, that's just the way he is. That's just the way she is, or, in nursing, you'll hear people say, oh, she's a good nurse. Like there's a big but in there. But we tolerate these behaviors because,
Mhm.
but we tolerate them. But there's never a good reason to tolerate nonverbal behaviors that diss or put somebody else down. Never.
I think you brought up such an interesting point that they're just normalized. They become part of the fabric of the
Mm-hmm.
culture, and to a point where even somebody who comes in from the outside may recognize that, hey, that's not right, but without having that supporting culture around them to say you're right, they start to doubt themselves. And then do you find that they become like adopting of those behaviors themselves?
Absolutely, because they're human beings. Once again, we learn through mimicry. So that's exactly what happens. And especially like in Canada, where I've spoken a lot in very rural areas, I mean, the group cohesiveness is super tight. So the tighter the group cohesiveness is, the harder it is to change these behaviors, but the easier it is once you start changing them to really they just go like wildfire. Like once the group decides these are not okay, then bam, you know, that's a good point. But like nurses in the middle of nowhere can't can't leave their positions, can't leave their positions at the hospital because most of their husbands are farmers. They're not going to leave the land.
Hmm.
And so they feel stuck. So we feel stuck. They don't have many choices. So especially you were talking about, so when people new come into a situation where the group cohesiveness is really tight, they tend to tolerate it because they are already saying, "Well, this is the only place to work for the next 100 kilometers." So,
Yeah.
I'm gonna do what everybody else does.
That's so interesting. I just recently had a conversation with someone. It's been a few months now, actually. They had taken a job rural, and there's only two other people there. And those two were so tight that if they didn't like you, they verbally said to you, "You won't work here. We're going to make sure you're gone." And this individual would call me for counsel, and I'm like, what are your values? Like, what would you prefer? And she's like, well, the job's really good. And you hear this a lot, right? I need the money, I need the job. But like what they're doing actually goes against my values as a nurse and a person. So, really, a lot of tension internally as to how to decide to move forward.
Yes, and that is called a clique. And you have to realize that whenever you have a clique, you don't have a team. So that's not a team that she's joined, because
Mhm.
teams don't have these groupings that are exclusive. And the reason why people form cliques is very interesting. It's to stay safe, but it's also to bolster their own sense of self-esteem. And I think it's very interesting. I mean, I knew it was to stay safe, but I thought it was very interesting that it's, I increase my sense of self-esteem because I belong here.
Oh, that is really interesting. That is, I wonder if that might be a new angle in to help dismantle those cliques by giving them another way to feel like they belong. What do you think of that?
Yes, definitely. You definitely could. And also gossip, like when you hear somebody speaking about somebody else, I mean, that's a way to really address this, because if you don't want somebody talking about you, then don't listen while they talk about somebody else.
Hmm.
It's very detrimental to the group. And would you like to know also the reason that people gossip is so that they can feel closer to the next person. They're trying to increase their sense of connection. So if you and I both know about her, then we're tight.
Hmm.
So it's interesting that the what drives these behaviors is not maliciousness. It's not people trying to be mean. It's because this is what we do as social animals. These are behaviors we learned in middle school and perfected by high school, and we play them out in the workplace.
But
And
it,
we've not been taught how to do it.
hmm I think that's such an interesting perspective to consider, is that it's not a malicious intent. It's actually they want to belong and they want to feel like they have a safe space, I suppose, with another person in their organization. And I think I have to be honest, I catch myself sometimes feeling the need to want to gossip with somebody to make myself feel better. I think, there's something going on in my own world that I think I need to do that. It's interesting when I catch myself doing it, though. It's fascinating.
Well, you said a very good word. Thanks for sharing that, because we do have to catch ourselves, because it's been normalized. As we said, it's normal. We do it in our families. We do it all over the place. And actually, it was something. There's a book called Sapiens, and it shows that this was very important to us as a species. Gossiping was very important because we shared information that could be damaging to the tribe. And when we shared these stories, it was actually came from our survival technique as a tribe, as a group. That's one of the theories, that gossip was important and necessary. Like if
Hmm.
I tell you, hey, do you know whose son got eaten by a tiger by that tree? Then we don't go near that tree.
Hmm.
And so we don't understand that there's another level that we can operate on. And that level is, what if everybody was a part of the team? What if everybody felt safe? And what if everybody was valued? And that brings us, of course, to the hierarchy, which is, the reason that these behaviors occur is because there's always a pecking order. And no matter what group you walk into, they'll tell you who's at the top. You can just say line up in order. You don't have to say anything more than that. And you can watch the new person's at the back, the person who has the most perceived powers at the front, and everybody knows where their spot is. So what we do is, we use these nonverbal behaviors to put people down.
Hmm.
Like, oh, I don't want to listen. That was report, but we don't have to say it. But we're really trying to, it's the herding behavior of a human being.
Hmm.
It's how we herd them down to the next level. Like, you don't belong here. Go back.
I was going to say, imagine like the people who contact you and talk with you who have been hurt by these behaviors are coming to you for some sort of advice. So, what would you tell them?
Well, I have to tell you, it's fascinating. They are so, so hurt. And the number one piece of advice that I could give anybody is to not take it personally, because if it wasn't you, they'll do it to somebody else and they're going to do it to the next person. So you
Mm.
have to understand that these are group dynamics. These dynamics are, the whole group is responsible, and they're just going to do it to anybody, because, and of course, leadership is so important, because it's leadership's job to make sure that everybody feels safe and that everybody's there. So if you have absent leadership, or actually if you have overly authoritarian leadership as well, then you have a tendency to see a lot of hostility in the group where people are vying for position and for place.
Mm-hmm. And I imagine in some, like, so healthcare is our background, but in other industries as well, when there are certain things that are limited, such as promotions, that you might see that a little bit more around those times when the job is open, that there's a little bit more tension between colleagues and maybe throughout the rest of the year. That can linger if it's not addressed right away, and that can become quite damaging to an organization.
It can. In many ways, it's not just promotion time. It's when you have a project. It's when, see, when you have this hierarchy and people competing and these nonverbal behaviors, it's not it's not the atmosphere. It's not the culture where any business can bloom and grow because people don't feel safe to express themselves. So it's not even just around promotion time. There's a project that's due. There's a snowstorm, and certain people can only certain people can get in. I mean, I could go on and on. The bottom line is that your workplace is like a finely tuned instrument. Think of a orchestra. Everybody can be playing wonderful. If you've got one instrument that's off key, it sounds terrible. And energetically, that's what your team is like. So you got to make sure you don't put up with the bad apple at all. I mean, our grandparents were right. One bad apple does spoil the whole bunch.
Yeah, they were,
And
weren't they?
yeah. So what you can do is, and so you were asking what I tell people. The first thing is to not take it personally. But the second thing is to call out those nonverbal behaviors. That's how you take the power away from them. So all you do is let's say you give a report to somebody and they go, thanks. You would say to them, I noticed that you rolled your eyes when I handed you the report. What were you thinking? Or did you want to say something to me? Or it's okay to speak to me directly.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a really amazing, actually, Dr. Martha Griffin, she actually did a study, and she taught her nursing students how to respond, and they role played the answers. And boy, when they went into the work environment, they were powerhouses.
Mm-hmm.
They knew, if you don't want to work with a nurse today, I'd be happy to work with somebody else. They weren't going to put up with any of the nonverbal behaviors because they had practiced them. And that's another thing. We teach communication models in businesses, but I think it's really important to remember that if we don't role play it, if you don't do the and every business has their scenes.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I could say to any business, name the first 5 conversations. Give me the list of the 5 conversations that are not happening that everybody knows not to talk about, or who not to talk about what.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody knows it. It's called culture.
Yeah. Yeah. So that just made me think of so many things. How would we then, as a team, overcome this? What is it that we need to do to build a really great team in the workplace?
We have to point out what we're doing that is not supportive to each other. And a great way to do this is to simply put a piece of paper up in your break room and just start a conversation. Or what do you see happening around here all the time? Like, I see people helping each other whenever there's a crisis. I see that the photocopier is never out of paper. I see that smokers get more breaks than non-smokers. I see that certain people have issues with absenteeism. I see that people are on their cell phones all the time, etc. You make a list of everything, good, bad. You don't judge it. You just put it down. And then you get the group together and you say, are all these okay? Because as a group, you need to decide what's okay and what's not. Is it really okay that some people come in consistently late and others are on time? No, it destroys trust. And that's the foundation of your team. So you look at all of the behaviors and you decide as a group which ones are okay and which ones are not okay. No, it's not okay if somebody consistently comes into work 30 minutes late. It creates uneasiness and distrust.
Mm-hmm.
You have to have the same rules for all roles. You want to create an environment where people can speak their truth and be safe. And then you're going to have so much synergy and so much energy when everyone's valued. We don't make the same amount of money. We don't have the same positions or titles. But you know what I discovered is when we started valuing every member of our team, it was a housekeeper who saved a patient's life. Then a nursing assistant saved the next person's life. And it wasn't because people told them what to do. It was because the culture was such that they knew that they were valued. Mm-hmm. And they knew that the number one priority was the patient. So you have to know as a group, what's the number one priority for your team? What's the most important thing?
Yeah, goosebumps again. Goosebumps. I imagine that in order to create this team, create this environment, that some common language needs to be shared so that, we're not all coming in with different models or different processes in order to work on this culture. Is there something that you've seen around that process of creating the same language around conflict?
Yeah, it's a very important for any group to have the same language. I'll give you an example. So after one team was educated on what the behaviors were that were verbal and nonverbal behaviors that were hurtful to the team, they made a promise to help each other to say, I noticed that you rolled your eyes. I noticed that you raised your eyebrows. I noticed they in a group, as a group, they made a promise to say this to each other, but to do this, but then they needed that common language.
Mhm.
So what they decided to do is something that was actually nonverbal. They took their fingers and they just went like this, meaning, would you like to make a U-turn? Would you like to go back? Would you like to turn around? Would you like to stop that behavior and go around? So people just saw this little U-turn whip and nobody else knew what it was about. And in that way, they were able to help each other to overcome the behaviors that were really hurtful to them.
I think that's fabulous because I do think the common language needs to be there and the common education. So when they do come to each other and they're saying, hey, I noticed you roll your eyes, they can go, oh, yes, this comes from the training. We committed to it. I'm on board. Let's talk about it. As opposed to just one person saying, I'm going to change the culture. I don't like how it is here. And then they just go and do something. It can cause more tension.
And a lot of companies think that their mission, vision, and values cover all of this. They've got it covered. But as I often say, those were created by dead people.
Mm.
So what you need is a piece of paper that everybody agrees. I mean, do you agree? You know, so what our nurses came together and we wrote a piece of paper that said, we promise to take care of your loved one as we would our very own family member. And we understand and acknowledge that in order to create the safest environment and the most healing environment, we must care for each other. And then in a union environment, everybody, was asked to sign that, to
Mhm.
get on the same page. Did they all sign it? No, two did not. And one I got on board, and one I helped find another place in the organization. And then wait till you see the synergy in that team. I mean, they solve their own problems. They come up with creative solutions. They thrive, basically. They just thrive.
That is so powerful. That is amazing. So there's a free resource you want to offer to our listeners here, and it's the 10-minute staff education interviews. Why don't you talk to us a little bit about what that is?
Sure. Lots of times when people hear this information, they want to take it back to their company or to their team, and they don't know how. And so it's 3 10-minute videos. And the first one basically is what is peer-to-peer hostility? And there's a question and a handout at the end of it. It's this very short video of somebody interviewing me. The second one is basically, why should I care about it? I mean, why is this important to me? And the third one is what you can do about it. And therefore, it doesn't take up an entire hour and people don't have to go to trainings and you don't have to prepare anything. It's simply, they all end with a question and it's just long enough really and just in depth enough to get the conversation started in your workplace on why culture is critical and everyone's responsibility in creating a great work environment.
Hmm. I love it. And I love that those resources are available to those who are listening, particularly because you've brought up a really important piece of communication that often results in conflict is that nonverbal piece where we don't check it out and we don't see if our interpretation is correct. So opening up that space to have a conversation is such an important place.
Right. And so just I want to leave you with two things. Always speak your truth. Say what you see. You don't have to be right, just say what you see. And the second thing is say, I noticed that. It's very non-confrontational.
Hmm.
It's opening a door. It gives the person an opportunity to say what they were thinking. I noticed that you leave the room every time I walk into it. I noticed that the same people eat lunch every day. I noticed that. Start bringing up the norms of your group and start talking about them.
Well, I noticed that you are very passionate about this topic, and I thank you so much for sharing your content and your knowledge and your zone of genius with us because it is such an important piece. And I can see people going to work tomorrow after listening to this going, I can actually start this conversation because all I need to say is, hey, I noticed this. What does that mean?
Yeah, right.
I love
It's
it.
very
Thank you
powerful.
so much.
You're welcome. Thanks for inviting me.
And that's an official wrap on this session of the Dissolve Workplace Conflict Summit Speaker Series. Now be sure to connect with your favorite speakers by clicking on the link below and taking advantage of the free resources that they are sharing with you so that you can dissolve your conflict without damaging your relationships. Now be sure to head on over into the Facebook group Dissolving Workplace Conflict and give us your favorite takeaways from today's session using the hashtag Dissolve Workplace Conflict. I can't wait to see what you've learned.